She realized they had written her out the moment the curtain fell. At first, Maris Ellington thought the plaque had to be unfinished. The ballroom of the Ellington Museum glowed with donor light, polished glass, and the kind of old-money confidence that makes every room feel edited before anyone even speaks. Trustees stood in careful clusters. A quartet moved softly through something expensive and forgettable. Champagne crossed the room on silver trays. And at the center of it all, beneath a velvet curtain and a wall of cameras, stood the dedication portrait for the museum's restored cultural wing. Maris had built that wing, not ceremonially, not socially, not in the polished way wealthy families confuse hosting with authorship. She had built it through donor negotiations that nearly collapsed, governance repairs no one else understood well enough to make, collection battles, archive protections, advisory rewrites, and the invisible labor that makes institutions look inevitable long after they should have failed in public. Then the curtain dropped, and beneath the portrait, the bronze plaque named only 3 people: Victor Ellington, Graham Ellington, the Ellington Family Legacy Council. Not Maris. For one strange second, she thought there had to be an explanation, a temporary plate, a draft, a mistake no one important had caught before the room filled. Then the applause began. That was when disbelief turned into recognition. No one looked surprised. Not her husband, not his mother, not the board, not the donors who had spent years smiling at Maris with the warm approval reserved for women whose labor had become too constant to feel visible anymore. By the end of that night, Maris would understand something colder than humiliation. They had not forgotten her. They had simply grown comfortable building the final story without her in it. And by the end of the week, the family who had mistaken her grace for permission would learn a truth they should have respected much earlier. You can leave a woman off the plaque. You cannot leave her out of the structure she built underneath you. Before I tell you how a woman spent years saving a legacy that quietly learned to live without speaking her name, stay with me. Because this story is not really about a portrait. It is about what happens when someone you love stops protecting your place in the truth. For most of her marriage, Maris Ellington had been described in the kind of language powerful families use when they want to praise a woman without fully acknowledging what she makes possible. Refined, brilliant, steady. The one who made everything feel human. It sounded generous. It was not. Because those words floated around the edges of her real contribution while avoiding the center of it. Maris did not simply make things human. She made them hold. Long before the cultural wing became a gleaming symbol of civic memory and Ellington prestige, it had been something far more fragile. A project balanced between donor pressure, family vanity, public ambition, and the private incompetence of people who wanted legacy without discipline. Maris gave it form. She repaired the donor framework after 2 major families threatened to pull out. She protected the collection from branding decisions that would have gutted its integrity. She rebuilt advisory trust after Victor Ellington's arrogance nearly triggered a quiet revolt. And when the whole project came closest to collapse during its ugliest funding crisis, it was Maris who designed the rescue package that saved it, without letting the family's public image bleed into the street. That was the dangerous part. She had rescued them too well. By the time the museum was stable again, the Ellington family had already grown comfortable with a version of reality in which Maris's intelligence was essential in private and optional in public. Her husband Graham had not started that way. That was what made the pain harder to name honestly. When they first met, he seemed genuinely moved by her mind. He listened. He asked what she thought. He corrected rooms when they oversimplified her. Once, early in the marriage, A trustee tried to thank Graham for a donor language fix Maris had personally written. Graham smiled and said, "That was Maris. I was just smart enough to agree with her." She remembered that moment for years, because women do not forget the early evidence that love once had courage inside it. But admiration in weak people can slowly turn into dependency without gratitude, then into comfort, then into something colder still, the desire to keep receiving someone's strength without ever fully honoring what it says about your own. Graham never had to steal Maris's work aggressively. He only had to stop correcting the room. A donor thanked him for language she had drafted. He let it pass. A board member praised his steadiness during a crisis she had personally contained. He let it pass. His mother called Maris the warmth behind the institution's soul. Everyone smiled. He let it pass. That was how disappearance entered her life, not as violence, as permission. The person who refined that permission into something nearly elegant was Sylvia Ellington. Graham's mother never needed open cruelty. She understood a more efficient form of social harm. Define a woman beautifully enough, and people stop noticing what you have removed from her. Maris brings conscience to the family, Sylvia once said over dinner. Graham gives the museum direction. She gives it depth. Everyone at the table seemed satisfied by that arrangement. Vision and depth. Vision and support. The son in front, the wife beneath. Maris smiled then too, but she felt the coldness of realizing that if she ever disappeared, people like Sylvia would know exactly how to speak about her kindly while stepping over the space she left behind. Still, Maris stayed. Not because she was blind, because she believed, for longer than she should have, that love would eventually choose truth in the moments that mattered. Then came the conversation that broke the last illusion. Months before the unveiling, the museum's final legacy materials were being prepared. Donor acknowledgments, dedication text, opening night remarks, board credits. Maris had been working late in the library wing one evening when she heard voices in the adjoining office. Victor, Sylvia, Graham. She should have kept walking. Instead, she stopped. "The plaque needs to stay simple," Victor said. "Family line, founding line, leadership line." Sylvia answered first. "Maris doesn't need public authorship to feel valued." Silence. Then Graham, in a voice so calm it hurt more than anger would have, said, "She cares more about the work than the recognition." That was the sentence that changed everything, because it was true, and because it was being used against her. He knew she cared about the work. He knew she loved the museum deeply enough to protect it from spectacle. He knew she would rather preserve meaning than create a scene. And somewhere along the way, he had mistaken that integrity for a guarantee that she would survive being erased quietly. Maris didn't confront him that night. She went home and opened the private archive she maintained more out of discipline than suspicion, or so she used to tell herself. Then she began preserving the truth. Every donor revision, every tracked change, every recovery memo, every governance note, every draft showing who built the framework, who repaired the damage, who recommended the right decisions, and who merely stood near the finished version long enough to look inevitable in the photographs. The more she documented, the less confused she felt. That is the strange mercy of clarity. Once pain becomes pattern, you stop asking whether you are too sensitive. You start asking who has grown too comfortable living inside your silence. And Maris knew one more thing. Buried inside the recovery structure she had designed during the funding crisis was a dormant clause. Technical, boring, legally clean, easy for arrogant people to sign and forget. A contingent governance review mechanism. If public authorship, fiduciary accountability, or institutional representation materially separated truth from responsibility, a review could be triggered, and donor-facing language, museum communications, and public representation could be frozen, pending board examination. She had built it to protect the museum. Now, for the first time, she understood it might also protect her from the people who loved the museum's story more than its truth. So she waited. Opening night arrived. The curtain fell. The plaque was wrong. The applause came. Maris stood through all of it. That mattered. Because real power does not always announce itself in the room where it is being tested. Sometimes it waits until everyone else has mistaken composure for surrender. An hour after the unveiling, while donors drifted toward the reception hall and Graham was still being congratulated as the public face of the wing, Maris triggered the review. Not publicly, not emotionally. Precisely. The audit chair received the authorship trail. Board counsel received the clause activation memo. 2 principal donors received corrected contribution records. The museum's oversight advisor received a quiet request to review whether the dedication materials materially misrepresented authorship during the protected recovery period. By morning, the first calls had begun. By noon, the dedication language was frozen pending internal review. By afternoon, Graham was informed that he could not continue publicly representing the wing until authorship clarification was complete. By evening, Victor learned that the family did not control the narrative as completely as he had assumed. And by the next day, the board had issued a corrected institutional statement naming Maris Ellington as the principal architect of the wing's recovery, preservation strategy, donor stabilization, and governance design. The statement did not scream. It did something far more devastating. It told the truth, cleanly. Graham found Maris alone in the East Corridor just after the correction circulated. The museum was quiet then. The guests were gone. The beautiful performance of the previous night had already begun collapsing under the weight of documentation. He looked shaken, but not shocked enough. "Maris," he said, "you could have come to me." She turned toward him, and for the first time in years, she did not soften what she knew just to make him feel less guilty standing near it. "I did," she said, "for years." That landed harder than accusation. He looked away first. "It didn't have to become this." She almost smiled. "No," she said quietly. "It didn't. You could have said my name before I had to prove it belonged there." He had no answer. Because the final break in a relationship is rarely caused by one dramatic betrayal. It is caused by all the smaller moments someone decided the easier version of reality mattered more than protecting the person beside them. Maris did not feel triumph. That would have made the ending too small. What she felt instead was grief, sharpened into self-respect. Not because the museum had finally corrected the record, because she had finally stopped helping other people live comfortably with her erasure. Victor kept the family name on the wall and lost control of the story. Sylvia kept her elegance and lost the comfort of arranging truth through tone alone. Graham kept the painful knowledge that he had not lost Maris because of one plaque or one night. He had lost her gradually. Every time he let the room absorb her labor without correction. Every time he accepted her grace as proof the wound was manageable. Every time he trusted her love more than he honored her place in the truth. And Maris? She did not become colder. She became exact. She stopped confusing being deeply needed with being deeply cherished. Stopped believing dignity arrives only after someone important finally says your name out loud. Stopped helping people tell cleaner stories at the cost of her own disappearance. Because dignity begins much earlier than recognition. It begins the moment you stop making yourself easy to erase. If this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what hurts more in the end? Being openly betrayed or realizing someone you loved had learned how to honor your work only in private, where it cost them nothing? Some betrayals are not loud enough to scandalize a room. They are only quiet enough to reveal who was always willing to live without the truth. I'll see you in the next story.